येनाक्षरसमाम्नायमधिगम्य महेश्वरात् कृष्णं व्याकरणं प्रोक्तं तस्मै पाणिनये नमः। वाक्यकारं वररुचिं भाष्यकारं पतञ्जलिं पाणिनिं सूत्रकारं च प्रणतोऽस्मि मुनित्रयं नत्वा सरस्वतीं देवीं शुद्धां गुण्यां करोम्यहं पाणिनीयप्रवेशाय लघुसिद्धान्तकौमुदीम्। We are discussing Sutranam Badhyabadhaka. So we talked about the simultaneous application or possibility of application of two sutras. We have to choose one of them. There are fundamental set of rules defined. There is one paribhasha in Paribhashendu Shekhara. Purva Paranitya Antaranga Apavadanam Uttarottaram Baliyaha. Uttarottaram. So the previous is less powerful than the next one, or the next one is more powerful than the previous one. So we say Utsarga Apavada is the first technique to use. If that does not work, Antaranga Bahiranga is the technique to use. If that does not work, then Nitya Anitya technique is to be used. And finally, it is the Purva Para technique that is to be used. Then we went over a bunch of examples, some really trivial examples, like even in the case of Rama plus Su, there is a conflict. Some examples like say Vari plus Jasa, Madhu plus Jasa, where we listed like 4, 5, 6 different conflicting sutras. And these eventually get resolved by proper understanding of this particular paribhasha. Then we also talked about the fact that this is just a blanket paribhasha. You have a bunch of like 30, 35 paribhashas in that entire section. There are a group of paribhashas that talk about apavada, talk about nitya, talk about antaranga bhiranga, talk about utsarga apavada. So there is no one definition of nitya, there is no one definition of antaranga bhiranga. There are like bunch of definitions that are collected together. Any questions, any further comments on that particular discussion? If not, what I'm going to start today is by reading the Bhashya of Vipratishedhe Param Karyam. Obviously, I'm not going to go over each line, or I'm not going to go over the entire Bhashya. As I mentioned earlier, the Bhashya consists of the Bhashya of Vipratishedhe Param Karyam has around 28, 29 Vartikas, out of which first 8 Vartikas talk about Vipratishedhe Param Karyam and the related aspects. Starting from Vartika 9 onwards, he talks about, or Vartika 8 onwards, I think, he talks about Antaranga Bahiranga. So Antarangam cha Baliyaha Bhavati iti Vaktavyam. Starting from Vartika 8 to Vartika 28, so set of 21 Vartikas, he is only on Antaranga Bahiranga Paribhasha, which is completely out of scope. I can talk about it, but it's not in the scope of Vipratishedhe Param Karyam. After studying Vipratishedhe Param Karyam, we should actually talk about Nitya Anitya, and then we go to Antaranga Bahiranga, and finally Utsarga Pavada. I'm happy to talk a little through each of these, but let's go through the initial bhashya of Vipratishedhe Paramkaram and understand that particular point, because that was what you wanted in the beginning. Prarabha mein hai? So he starts with the sutra Vipratishedhe Paramkaryam. Vipratishedha iti kaha ayam shabdaha. So even before going to the discussion of this word Vipratishedha, he is trying to understand what is the derivation, what is the vyutpatti of this word. This vyutpatti doesn't really matter for us, because whatever is the vyutpatti, there is a fixed meaning in the Vyakarana Shastra that we are going to use. But still he starts by saying Vipratishedha ityatra kaha shabdaha, and then he gives the answer Vipratipurvat sidhehe karma vyatihare ghaya. So forget about karma vyatihara, everything should be clear. V pratipurvat. So V plus prati plus sidha. So you have a sidha dhatu. V plus prati plus sidha plus ghaya. When the ghaya pratyaya is attached to the sidha dhatu, and that sidha dhatu has V and prati as the two upasargas, this is how the word vipratishedha is formed. V plus prati plus sidha plus ghaya. Ghaya is an ardhadhatuka pratyaya. C, the ikara becomes se, and then sa becomes a sh. There is a sutra in the Shatva Prakara Vipratishedha. And then he says, Kasmin arthe ghaya pratyayaha karma vyatihare ghaya pratyayaha. Karma vyatihara is a special process where two parties act the same thing against each other. So for example, one person throws an arrow at another, other person throws an arrow at first person. First person feeds other person feeds the first. So in the context of karma vyatihara, the term vipratishedha is being defined because first sutra is trying to block second sutra is trying to block first. That's how the word vipratishedha is defined, and therefore he explains it in the next word immediately. Itaretara pratishedha. So one blocks the second, or at least tries to block the second. The second does the same thing on the first. We have also seen this other word anyonya. So anyonya pratishedha. So he's simply trying to explain the word vipratishedha in these few lines. Vipratishedha iti kaha shabdaha vipurvat pratipurvat sidhehe karma vyatihare ghaya. You have this sidha dhatu in the dhatu patha. This is the Shidhagatyam. So they go against each other. See, hinder, regulate, scare away, drive off. Okay, so one sutra tries to hinder another, other sutra tries to hinder the first one. So this is Shidhagatyam verb. V plus prati plus Sidha. Karma vyatihare ghai pratyaya bhavati. And then the meaning of the word is explained. Itaretara pratishedho vipratishedaha anyonya pratishedho vipratishedaha. This is the sutram that does the shatva. Upasargat sunoti suvati seti sauti stovati stha senaya sedha. So there is a sedha word over here. Upasargat. When the sedha form of the sidha dhatu comes after the upasarga, sakarasya murdhanyadeshaha bhavati. Abhisedhati. In the same way, vipratisheedhati. Okay, so you have v plus prati plus sidha plus ghaya. The ghaya pratyay ghakara and yakara itsamya bhavati a iti avashishyate. Ghaya is the ardhadhatuka pratyaya, so puganta laghupadasya gives v pratisedha. Upasargat sunoti suvati gives shatva v pratishedha. This is the prakriya. Clear so far? The meaning given is iteretara pratishedha, anyonya pratishedha, vipratishedha. After explaining the grammatical derivation, then he comes to the actual meaning of this word in the Vyakarana Shastra, which may or may not be similar to grammatical derivation, but usually it resonates. That's why the derivation is given. Kaha punaha vipratishedaha द्वौ प्रसंगौ अन्यार्थौ एकस्मिन् सहा विप्रतिषेधः. In the Vyakarana Shastra, vipratished is defined by the word dvau prasangau anyarthau ekasmin. Prasanga is a sutra in this context or an application of a rule in this context. Anyarthau. They are actually meant, artha is prayojana. They are actually meant for some other purposes. There is a purpose for supicha. There is a purpose for bahuvachane jhalyeta. So anyarthau. Supicha was created so as to have dirgha in vrukshabhyam. Bahuvachane jhalyeta was created so as to have etva in vruksheshu. But now what happens? They are happy operating in their own places, but there comes a place called vruksha plus bhyasa, which is also a this sup, which is also a bahuvachana pratyaya. So both of the sutras start fighting at that place. So dvau prasango anyartho. This anyartho part is extremely important. If that particular sutra is not anyartha, means if it is not designed for an independent use case, it cannot be called a vipratishedha. So for example, if there is a certain sutra, sutra X, which has a particular domain, and if sutra Y is designed to act purely inside that domain, then it is not anyartha. Anya means other possibility of application. It Imagine a typical Venn diagram. It should be exactly like this. One sutra should have a separate area. Second sutra should have a separate area. That's anya prayojanam. Anya prayojanam yasya saha anyarthaha. द्वौ प्रसंगौ अन्यार्थौ एकस्मिन् एकस्मिन् एव स्थले तयोः युगपत् प्राप्तिः भवति सः विप्रतिषेधः. द्वौ प्रसंगौ यदन्यार्थौ भवतः एकस्मिन् च युगपत् प्राप्नुतः सः विप्रतिषेधः. That's the next line. He explains this. द्वौ प्रसंगौ अन्यार्थौ भवतः एकस्मिन् च युगपत् प्राप्नुतः सः विप्रतिषेधः. And then he asks example. The Purva Paksha or the student asks an example. Kva ityukte kutra. Kutra punaranyarthau. Kutra cha ekasmin yukapat prapnutah. What are the places where a sutra appears independently and what are the places where it conflicts? He gives an example. Vrukshabhyam vruksheshu iti anyarthau. Vrukshebhya ityatra yugapat prapnutah. You have to read between the lines. Supicha and bahuvachane jhalyeta are being discussed. Vrukshabhyam ityatra kevalam supicha iti pravartate. Vruksheshu ityatra kevalam bahuvachane jhalyeta iti pravartate. So it is anyarthau. Vrukshabhyam vruksheshu iti anyarthau. Vrukshebhyah iti yugapat prapnutaha.
So the
Okay.
same thing can we say for At Guna and Akasavarna Dirgha?
No, because we'll talk about that. What happens is in case of Akasavarni Dirghaha, there are two sutras that together encompass the entire domain of Adguna, so there is no Anyartha. Okay, so Adgunaha and Iko Yenachi come together. That's why he says Prasangau. He doesn't use the word sutra. That's the reason I did loosely translated it as sutra. Prasanga, the technical or the direct translation of prasanga is situation, one situation and another situation. So if you consider the situation, the scope of applying akasavarne dirghaha, it does not become anyartha anymore if you take a prasanga of applying either adgunaha or ikoyanichi. So the prasanga of adguna and ikoyanichi together stop the possibility of making akasavarne dirghaha as anyartha. It's a little complicated. I'll come to that towards probably later this in this class or next class. Okay.
Thank you.
Any further? So now what happens when two sutras which have their independent existence or possibility of existence in two different places, what exactly happens when they fight with each other? Now there is a little bit of additional discussion over here which is not there in the Mahabhashyam. I don't know how many of you have actually studied something called as Jati Paksha versus Vyakti Paksha. Let's say understand this concept. If I use this particular statement, cow has four legs. Okay. Which cow am I referring to?
All cows,
All cows in the world.
generally.
Okay. Except for some
Generally,
weird cows whose leg has been cut off and so on, but we can keep that aside. Generally, all cows in the world. So
yeah.
the word dhenu in that sentence refers to all dhenu. Okay. Dhenuhu upavishati. The cow is sitting. Same word cow. Now, what cows am I referring to?
To a particular cow which is in front of our eyes or something.
In front of me, for example, or maybe what I'm imagining. So the same word dhenu, understand, dhenoho chatvarah padaha dhenuhu upavishati. Same word dhenu, but in first sentence the same word refers to all dhenus in the world. In the second sentence it refers to a particular dhenu that I have in mind. Clear? This is the power of the language. The same word can refer to the entire category or it can refer to one particular instance. This particular distinction or this particular difference is characterized by the terms Jati Paksha versus Vyakti Paksha. Jati Paksha is the usage of a word where a word is used to indicate the entire category. Vyakti Paksha is the instance of a word where a word is used to represent a particular member of that category. Vrukshasya parnani haritani.
Mm.
Except for people, trees in the USA, all trees probably have green colored leaves. Okay. And Vrukshat phalam patitam. I'm talking about one
Mm.
particular tree from which the fruit is fall, whereas Vrukshasya parnani haritani. Purushaha na hantavyaha. Which man should not be killed? All. You should not kill anybody. So Purushaha na hantavyaha jati paksha. Purushaha chalati vyakti paksha. Think about examples because unless you spend time and understand this particular difference, we cannot go ahead.
Flower, picking of flower. Flower picking is not allowed.
हाँ,
Or
प्रतिषिद्धम
flower is
पुष्पचयनम
blooming.
हाँ,
Mm.
okay,
Uh,
pushpachayanam pratishiddham, which means
uh,
there are 1,000 flowers, you can't pick any of them.
yeah.
And you say pushpe bhramaraha asti. You're talking about one
Uh,
particular flower on which the bee is present. You
yeah,
got
the
the
flower
point,
is
right?
blooming. Or something.
The
Yeah,
flower
yeah,
is
I got
blooming.
understood.
Pushpam vikasati.
Yeah.
Pushpam vikasati.
Mm.
Okay.
Pushpam
Whereas
vikasati.
pushpachayanam nishiddham. Okay. So
Mm.
basically, you're not allowed to cut any flowers, whereas there's one particular flower which is blossoming, whatever. Now, what happens is, even in the case of sutras, there is a concept of jati paksha versus vyakti paksha. So, for example, if you take an example of a sutra called Supicha, it have multiple instances. Like there are multiple cows. So the word go can represent all those cows. In the same way, a sutra can represent all those instances in a single step, or a sutra can be treated in a Vyakti Paksha and it can represent each of these cases separately. So basically, we says there is a different Supicha for Rama plus Bhyam, there is a different Supicha for Vriksha plus Bhyam, there is a different Supicha for Krishna plus Bhyam. Whereas in case of Jati Paksha, we say is the same supicha which acts in case of Vriksha plus Bhyam and Rama plus Bhyam and Krishna plus Bhyam and Shiva plus Bhyam and so on. Now, what happens is this, understand this point very carefully. If it is a Jati Paksha, if it is the same sutra, then what this sutra is going to think is like this. In Vriksha plus Bhyam, I have my scope of operation. I'm happy over there. Similarly, Bahuvachane Jhalyeta is going to say that I have my scope and I'm going to operate properly at Vruksheshu. When it comes to the middle situation, Vrukshebhyaha, the individual sutras are themselves charitartha, are themselves satisfied, are themselves contented by getting a chance to exhibit their properties. So, in case of conflict, they are going to say, okay, you go ahead. Understand? If a student is already giving 10 answers, then probably in a debate he might think that I have already given 10 answers, let me keep quiet and let the other person give a few answers in a class, for example. Okay, so in the Jati Paksha, a sutra becomes contended. A sutra, this is not there in the Bhasha, this is there in a different part of Paribhasha in the Shekhara, but it maps over here. So I'm just trying to put some analogies. So in the Jati Paksha, a sutra becomes contended by its application at other places, and it says, well, you go ahead, I don't really care. Okay, this is one possibility. In the reverse, Vyakti Paksha, every instance is new. So Vriksha plus Bhyam, there is a different Supicha Sutra. In Vriksha plus Bhyas, there is a different Supicha Sutra. This Supicha Sutra is going to say that I never got a chance to execute myself. I never got a chance to show my effect. So I am the one who is going to come. So he will fight and win back this chance, win back the scope. So if you treat sutras as Jati Paksha, they are like Udara. They try to give out the scope, they try to sit quietly without doing anything. If you try to bring the Vyakti Paksha, the sutras say, I want to get executed. I want to show my effect. Therefore, when the two sutras conflict each other, what is going to happen? There are two things that are going to happen. Either both the sutras are going to stay mute, so none of the sutras will actually execute because each of them will think that I'll give a chance to another sutra, or both of them will forcefully try to execute themselves by blocking the other sutra. Clear? Not clear? So two different possibilities. We are not saying what happens. We are saying two different possibilities.
But so in this case, like when we say a sutram, it's applicable all over right now, right? It's like, how are we I mean, it's applicable to any word, or if those nimittas are satisfied, it is.
It is applicable to any word. That's always correct. The point is, if there is a conflict, will that sutra want itself to apply first, or will that sutra give a chance to another person, to another sutra to get applied? We are not saying the sutra is not going to apply. Actually, we will say that at a different place in the Paribhasha, not here. But in general, we are not saying that the sutra is not going to apply. We are saying that the sutra will apply, but it is as if like, well, I have already done this much. So for example, if two people are sitting and one eats four rotis and the next roti comes, he will say, okay, I'm content by eating four rotis, and this person has not eaten anything, give him two rotis, and then I can have my turn back. This is an attitude of thinking. We are not saying this is, I mean, we are just imagining sutras as people who are trying to think in this way. I'm just trying to come up with two possibilities. One is that a sutra will say, no, no, I want to execute, and the sutra will actively block another. Second is, the sutra will say, okay, if there is a scope for me to execute, I'll execute. But if there is someone who is in the hurry of being showing their effect, let them go and show the effect.
So both are contending, or both think that I should be executing. So they belong to Vyakti Paksha, and
That is correct.
them
In
are.
the Vyakti Paksha, correct. Vyakti Paksha both think that I want to execute. In Jati Paksha, both think that let you execute. And that's where the Anyartha part is important. If it was not Anyartha, Jati Paksha would not come in the picture. Supicha has its own applicability of Rukshabhyam, and Bahuvachane Jhalyeta has its own applicability of Ruksheshu. So they have Anyartha and they're content over there.
In that prasanga where it does not find other applications, right? It's not anyartha, right? Still, we are talking
Which
about it here.
which
Like
prasanga?
we
Which
say,
prasanga?
we say that when two sutras compete with each other, and they are that anyarthaka, right? Like it has the presence in a different place. So this the other condition that we were talking about, where it doesn't even have a chance anywhere else.
Oh, that is
Right.
not a part of discussion here at all. So all that we are in this particular whole Vipratishdhe Karam Param Karya, we are discussing only Anyarthas. If it is a case of like Sasajushoruhu versus Jhalan Jashonte, or a better example, Somor Napumsakat versus Atom. If it's an Utsargapavada Sutra, we are not talking about any of these.
Can we take this sutra? We have Samyogantasya Lopaha, and recently we studied that Skoho Samyogadyor Ante, Adyor Ante, that one. Can we take that as an example for this?
The Sanyoganta Silopa and Sko Sanyogadyorantech are basically in the Tripadi. Both of them are in the Tripadi. Vipratishdha does not operate in Tripadi at all. In
Right.
Tripadi, sutras are not aware of each other. In case of Ko Sanyogadyorantech, it is what? An apavada of Sanyoganta Silopa. Sanyoganta Silopa will require the last one to get
That's right.
removed, but the Sko and Ko will be the previous one, the first of the Sanyoga.
So anyway, in Tripadi, Vipratish, doesn't work.
Yeah,
So
Vipratishdha cannot occur because Vipratishdha requires other person. See, two sutras are competing means what? One sutra knows there is a competitor. If one sutra doesn't agree that there is a competitor, there is no competition, and therefore Vipratishdha does not occur in case of Tripadi. Clear? So, what are the two possibilities? The two possibilities are that the two sutras will fight for winning the chance, or two sutras will voluntarily give the chance and not do anything. Therefore, possibility number one, we don't know what to do because both are trying to do. Possibility number two, we don't know what to do because nobody is trying to do anything. Clear? So far, so good. Problem is clear. Now, what he explains ahead. Kim chasyat. So he says, Kva puna anyarthau kvacha ekasmin yugapat prapnutaha. What is an example of anyartha? Vrikshabhyan and vriksheshu is the example of the anyartha. Vrikshebhyaha is the example of yugapat praptihi. Kim chasnyat. He explains this in great detail. Ekasmin yugapad asambhavat. See, supicha is causing a dirgha. Bahuvachane jhalyeta is causing etwadesha. Can you have the same letter being dirgha and etwadesha at the same time? Obviously not. You have to choose one. So, ekasmin yugapad asambhavat. Asambhava. Kasya asambhavaha? Karyasya asambhavaha. Now, this is a very crucial point which is going to discuss 2 lines later. We are saying that two are simultaneously applicable. So on one level, we are saying Yugapat Praptihi. See, the word we always use is Yugapat Praptihi. And suddenly we use the word called Yugapad Asambhavaha. This is the plus a full the is there. Yugapad Asambhavaha. So how can we use the two conflicting terms at the same time? Yugapat Praptihi versus Yugapat Asambhavaha. So Yugapat Praptihi is for the sutras. The sutras are going to come in the same place. Karyas, there cannot be Yugapat Praptihi. Karyas, there has to be Yugapat Asambhavaha. So Kim cha syat ekasmin Yugapad Asambhavat Purvapara Praptehe Ubhaya Prasangaha. In the same statement, he uses contradictory words. Ubhaya Prasangaha and Ubhaya Yugapad Asambhavat. एकस्मिन् युगपदसंभवात् पूर्वस्याः परस्याः प्राप्तेः युगपदसंभवः कथं हि एकस्मिन् युगपदसंभवः and so on. So he goes more and more details and finally he tells कार्ययोः युगपदसंभवः शास्त्रयोः उभयप्रसंगः. So basically it's game on the terminology. Ubhaya prasanga or ubhaya prapti is shastrayoho ubhaya prapti. युगपद असंभव is karyayoho yugapad asambhava. So two sutras are in the arena at the same time, conflicting with each other. That's ubhaya prasangaha. The actions cannot simultaneously happen. There is akara which can either become akara or can become ekara, can't become both at the same time. Understand? It can first become akara and then it can become ikara if we want. If there is some other sutra causing that. That's not what we are talking. Same time, even in writing, you cannot write a and a at the same time. So, karyayoho yugapad asambhavaha. Okay, perfect. Now, what happens when such a particular conflict happens? He says there are various situations that can, come as a result. Trujadibhistulyam. He offers the first possibility. Trujadibhistulyam. There is a sutram in the sutra patha. Nuvul truchau. This is a sutram. This is a simple sutram. Is a sutram in the Krudanta Prakaranam, and it gives two pratyayas. Nuvul iti pratyaya. What is an example of a nuvul pratyaya?
Pachakaha,
Pachakaha,
Nayaka,
Nayakaha.
Nayakaha. Truch pratyaya. What is the example of truch pratyaya?
Ganta,
Dhata or
Dhatu,
Pita.
Karta, not pita. Karta, Pathita, Hasita, Karta, Neta, and so on. Truch. Okay. So this is a very simple sutram. It comes in the dhatoho adhikara, and he says dhatoho pratyay dvayam bhavati inval truchau. Now, what does the sutra mean? Do you say you take a pacha dhatu and add a wool and then add a truch? That's what the sutra is saying, right? Wool truchau. So balau gacchataha. Prathamaha balah gacchati, vidya balah gacchati. So take dhatu, add a wool, add truch. The patha plus wool plus truch. Is that how it happens? No. Paryayena prapnutaha. You can either apply a wool or you can apply a truch. Today you apply a wool, tomorrow you apply truch. That's what he's saying. Maybe something like that can happen, is what he's explaining. Trujadibhihi tulyam, trujadibhihi paryayaha prapnoti, tadyatha yatha trujadayaha paryayena bhavanti. Paryaya means first you apply truch, you create a new form, you come back to that sutra or that situation, you apply a wool and you create another form. So both of them are applicable, but one at a time. And it's not one after the other. It's either the first or the second, but you go back, you apply the first and then you apply. So for example, if doorbell rings and phone rings at the same time, you first open the door and then pick the phone, or you first pick the phone and then open the door. You cannot do both the things. Now in mobile world it's possible, but for us you have landline, it's not possible to do the same thing simultaneously. Okay, so you do first and then you go back to that original situation and you do the second. Maybe that's possible, right? So you have vriksha plus bhyasa. In one pathway you apply supicha causing vrikshabhyaha. In other pathway you apply bahuvachane jhalyeta causing vrukshebhyaha. What's the problem? That's what he says. Trujadayaha paryayena bhavanti. Kim punaha karanam trujadayah paryayena bhavanti. He says why. Now he goes a little bit digression. He says, why does Unavul and Trucha have to be applied one at a time? Why can't I apply them in a sequence? Now that's absurd. Basically, what he is saying is, Kim karanam trujadayah paryayena bhavanti. Why can't I say dhatu plus Unavul plus Trucha? Why should I say either dhatu plus Unavul or dhatu plus Trucha? Trivial question. And then he says anavayava prasangat pratipadam vidhesha. Basically he's trying to say both of them are applicable on dhatus. Dhatu asmin adhikare santi. If you apply a wool through a dhatu, it's no more a dhatu, so you cannot apply truch. If you apply truch to a dhatu, it's no more a dhatu, so you cannot apply a wool. Okay, so anavayava doesn't have a proper avayava on which the pratyay can be attached. Okay, so that's again, bhashya is usually full of digressions, so this is a small digression, but the point is that what will happen, there will be one after other.
Here we are only one sutra only we are still talking right now. Why, like we are not sort of talking about the
We are
Ubhaya
talking about two
Prasanga.
sutras. We are talking about two sutras. So we have Ubhaya Prasanga.
For this Nuvul and this right now, I'm asking in that there is just a single sutram, right? Like why did
Oh, yeah,
we
yeah,
take?
yeah, yeah. No, no, no. He is not talking about. Oh, sorry. In Navul Truchav, he is not talking about Vipratisheda at all. He is giving a
Okay.
different analogy. He is saying, in case of Navul Truchav, how do we execute? There are two karyas that are happening: addition of
Okay.
Navul and addition of Truch. And I do them one by one. is actually similar to Vyakti Paksha, where the first sutra also wants to execute, second sutra also wants to execute. So we say, okay, you execute both of you. I'll allow both of you. In one pathway, sutra one executes. In other pathway, sutra second executes. So this is the solution in case of Vyakti Paksha. What happens in Vyakti Paksha?
Basically,
Both
you
of
are
them.
so basically you are saying why not kind of an optional form? Do one
Exactly.
with a dirgha and another with etva, so
Not
you
me,
end up with two
Bhashyakara.
forms. So
Bhashyakara, not me. I don't want to take credit. So Bhashyakara is saying, why not two forms? Do one form with Etva, do one form with Atva. Okay?
yeah.
So far, so good. So that's which Paksha? That's Vyakti Paksha, where each sutra wants to execute. So do we go to Bahuvachani Jhaleta and say, okay, go ahead and execute. We go to Supicha and say, okay, go ahead and execute. So if Supicha execute, it becomes Vrikshabhyaha. If Bahuvachani Jhaleta execute, it becomes Vrikshebhyaha. Fair enough? This is first Paksha. What is the second Paksha? Apratipattihi va ubhayoho tulyabalatvat. This is Jati Paksha. Apratipattihi. So both of them are happy in their own domains. Apratipatti means not actively executing oneself, not trying to show off, not trying to say, I want to execute. Keep quiet. Okay, so apratipattihi va ubhayoho tulyabalatvat. Both of them are tulyabala, both of them have done their own happily work somewhere else, they will keep quiet. Okay, that is what? That is Jati Paksha. अप्रतिपत्तिः वा पुनः उभयोः शास्त्रयोः स्यात्. उभयोः शास्त्र, both of them will keep quiet. किं कारणं? तुल्यबलत्वात्. अन्यत्र प्राप्तिः अस्ति. Both have equal power. Each of them is made happy by execution at some other place. तुल्यबले हि उभे शास्त्रे. And then he gives a very nice drishtanta, just like the way in the previous case he gives an example of an ultrichau. In the current case he gives a drishtanta. तद् यथा द्वयोः तुल्यबलयोः एकः प्रेष्यः भवति, सः तयोः पर्यायेण कार्यं करोति. यदा तु तम् उभौ युगपत् प्रेषयतः नानादिक्षु च कार्ये भवतः, तदा यदि असौ अविरोधार्थी भवति, पुनः उभयोः न करोति. किं पुनः कारणम् उभयोः न करोति? योगपद्य असंभवात्. Imagine a servant who is employed in two different households. Both of them give him a same type of work, same salary, same benefits, and so on. Therefore, this servant does not have a reason to prefer one over another. He just treats both of the families equally. When first family gives him the work, he will do the work. When the second family gives him the work, he will do the work. What if both the families give him a different work at the same time? If the first family says go in the east direction at 10 o'clock, the second family says go in the west direction at 10 o'clock. If he goes in the east direction, it will be preferring the first family. If he goes in the west direction, it will be preferring the second family. So he behaves like an ideal servant and doesn't do anything, keeps quiet. Why? Because he does not want to make any particular family feel bad. Avirodharthi. He does not want to prioritize, he does not want to prefer one family over another. Understand this point once again. Dvayoho tulya balayoho. Two families equally competing. Ekaha preshyaha. Preshyaha is servant. द्वयोः तुल्यबलयोः एकः प्रेष्यः भवति. There are two families who share a same servant. सः तयोः पर्यायेण कार्यं करोति. That particular servant, when first family says do some and it's not conflicting, the second family says some do some and not conflicting, he'll do the both works paryayena, one by one. So he'll do the karya of first family, or instead of family you can say there is a household, but say this husband gives some work, wife gives some work, and if as long as these are not conflicting, the servant will do the same work. But if husband sends the servant to one direction, wife sends to another direction, there is no reason for the servant to prefer one over other. Yada tu tam ubhau. Ubhau means those two people, those two families. Yugapat preshayataha, give, send in the same time. Nana dikshu cha karye bhavata. Dikshu, dish. Recently you studied or not yet studied? Saptami bahuvachana. Nana dikshu, different directions. Nana dikshu cha karye bhavataha. When both of them Yugapat preshayataha. Preshayataha is basically prathama purusha dvivachanam. Tam ubhau preshayataha. Both of them send him in different directions. Nana dikshu cha karye bhavatah. Tada yadi asau avirodharthi bhavati. Avirodharthi does not want to make anybody feel bad. Avirodharthi bhavati. यदि असौ अविरोधार्थी भवति उभयोः न करोति does not do a single work किं पुनः कारणम उभयोः न करोति यौगपद्य असंभवात् यौगपद्य simultaneous application of going in the east direction and going in the west direction is not possible. Therefore he just keeps quiet and does not do anything. That is jati paksha.
This Preshyaha and Tulyabala, how are you mapping it to that, Mahodaya? Like, the servant is a Karya. Is it like not a Karya itself, right? So it's the Sutra and
See, this is an analogy. So two people, say husband and wife giving the same work, are like opportunities. The pressure is basically a situation where a karya happens. When husband does not give any work and wife gives the work, it is basically anyatra prapti. When husband gives work, this is anyatra prapti of somebody else. And when both of them give the work, it is ubhaya prapti. Neither the example of Nuvul Trucho nor the example of the servant are Vipratishedha related examples. He is giving how a different analogy can map to a current context. Just like in case of Nuvul Trucha, we decided that we want to do Nuvul at one time and Truch at another time. In the same way, in Vipratishedha, we will execute one sutra at one time and other sutra at other time. In case of the servant, just like the way servant keeps quiet and does not do anything, in the same way the sutras will keep quiet and do not do anything. That's all that we are giving an analogy. We are not saying there is a Vipratisheda for Muritucha. We are not saying there is a Vipratisheda in case of servant. Interesting. So far, so good. Very interesting discussion.
yeah.
And it is this Jati Paksha where nobody is ready to execute. That is where we say Vipratishedhe Param Karyam. If nobody of you is executing, I have to put somebody's collar, pick somebody's collar and say, go ahead. Whose collar will I pick? Param Karyam. Vipratishedhe Param Karyam. Okay. If both of them are executing, I have to pull a collar and stop. Make somebody not go. That will be Purvam. But that's not what the sutra says. See, when both of them are trying to act simultaneously, I have to hold back somebody. That person would be Purva person. That's not what the sutra is saying. Sutra is saying in case of Vijati Paksha, when both the sutras are keeping quiet, I have to push somebody. Whom should I push? It is the Param Karya. Okay. So he says, Tatra. Tatra means what? In that particular example of servant, which maps to the Jati Paksha, which maps to the case where none of the sutra is trying to act. Tatra Pratipatyartham Vacha. Pratipatti means what to do. In order to understand what to do, realization. In order to realize what to do, Tatra Pratipatyartham Vachanam. Let's read this again. अप्रतिपत्तिः वा पुनः उभयोः शास्त्रयोः स्यात्. This is the Jati Paksha. Both of them are not going to execute. Kim karanam tulya balatvad. Both of them have equal power. Tulya balehi ubhe shastre. The analogy that is being given is dvayoho tulya balayoho ekaha preshaha bhavati. Husband and wife have the same servant. Saha tayoho paryayena karyam karoti. Whosoever gives the karya, he will do it. Yada tu tam ubhau yugapat preshayatah. Both of them give the same work. Nanadikshu cha karye bhavatah. The work is in the different direction. Tada yada yadi asau avirod. Very important word. Yadi asau avirodharthi bhavati. If he prefers one over other, obviously he will do that person's work. Yadi asau avirodharthi bhavati. Ubhayoho na karoti. Will not do anybody's work. Kim punak karanam bhayoho na karoti. Yogapadya asambhavat. He cannot do both karyas at the same time. Nasti yogapadyena sambhavaha. Tatra pratipatyartham idam vachanam. This particular statement is for that particular situation. We want to say when nobody is acting, come on, the later sutra should act. So far, so good. So in case of Jati Paksha, The Vipratishedhe Param Karyam Sutra says that you have to, the Parasutra, it tells the Parasutra that you have to go ahead and execute yourself. Vipratishedhe Param Karyam. Purva is anyway going to keep quiet. There's no question about it.
It is totally
Okay.
reversing what we usually think, right? When there is a competition, one always want to overpower, but here they are saying we both are silent, but we are pushing it like.
We are pushing on. Okay. Tatra Pratipatyartham Vachanam. But what about Vyakti Paksha? What if both are actually competing? Is the solution that they have proposed in a Vul Truchau acceptable? In case of Vyakti Paksha, is it acceptable to say, okay, both of you want to go, you also go, Vrukshabhya, Vrukshebhya? No.
Even there will be conflict, Mahodaya, because what will act first?
It doesn't matter because there are two different pathways. We are not saying first is acting and then second is acting. We are saying either Supicha will act, like in case of Nuvul Truchau, either Nuvul will act or Truch will act. Both of them, there is no first and second there. In the same way, either Supicha will act in one pathway and
Bahuvachane Jallet will act in another
Bahuvachane
path.
Jallet will act in another path.
Both the sutras will,
Yes,
in the
both
first
the sutras
section,
are trying to act in the same time. It's very simple. Like both people want to type an email at the same time. You give two computers. One types and other also types. Right? Same time. Right? They don't share a computer. You give one computer to one person, other to other person. In the same way, you say, okay, you want to execute. Here is one pathway you execute. Here's another pathway you both execute. At the end, both emails are ready. At the end, both forms are ready. Vrukshabhyaha by Supicha and Vrukshebhyaha by Bahuvachani. So what to do in Vyakti Paksha? Tatra niyamartham idam sutram vipratishedhe parameva bhavati. Understood this? This sutra suddenly becomes a niyama sutra in case of the Vyakti Paksha, and it says vipratishedhe param eva bhavati. Vipratishedhe parameva bhavati. I'm going to read the middle lines, but I just skipped that and gave you the answer for what happens in the Vyakti Paksha. So same sutra we completely interpret in two different ways. In case of Jati Paksha, we interpret it as a Vidhi Sutra, Vipratishedhe Param Bhavati. In case of Vyakti Paksha, we interpret it as the Niyama Sutra, Vipratishedhe Parameva Bhavati. And we leave it up to the sutras. If you want, you believe in Jati Paksha, you believe in Vyakti Paksha. It is essentially trying to satisfy both types of grammarians. There are some type of grammarians who believe in the Vyakti Paksha of the Sutra, some type of grammarian who believe in the Jati Paksha of the Sutra. Both of them have their own reasons to believe, they have their own prayogas to justify. We will not go in those details. The Vipratishedhe Param Karyam Sutra says, if you believe in the Jati Paksha, it is a Vidhi Sutra, Vipratishedhe Param Karyam. If you believe in the Vyakti Paksha, it is the Niyama Sutra, Vipratishedhe Parameva Karyam. And you are happy. Because in both of your pakshas, the sutra has exactly the same meaning. Clear? Not clear. This is just a beginning. A lot of further discussion is happening. This is really just scratching the surface.
Ultimately, the result is same.
Same, exactly. Ultimately, the result is same. Okay? Eventually, you only want to apply the para. If you say both are conflicting, we make a niyam, parameva karyam. If you say nobody is applying, we make a vidhi, param avashyam karyam.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what he's saying. Iha bhavata dvau hetu vyapadishtau. I'm going to come to the middle part. I'm just like connecting bits and pieces. Iha bhavata dvau hetu vyapadishtau. He says we have given two different examples. You gave the example of Nuvul Truchau and you say it is a Vyakti Paksha. You gave the example of that servant and you said that the Jati Paksha. So he says dvau hetu trujadibhistulyam paryayam prapnoti. That's one. Apratipattihi va ubhayoho tulyabalatvat. Okay? And then he gives a very beautiful wording. He says, let's see how this sutra behaves in both these cases. Trujadibhihi tulyam, in that particular case, where both of them are eager to get applied, tad yada esha hetuhu trujadibhistulyam paryayaha prapnoti tada विप्रतिषेधे परमित्यनेन किम क्रियते niyamaha kriyate. When both of them are simultaneously applicable, we have to force a niyama vipratishedhe parameva bhavati. So, if you want to treat, if you want to go to Vyakti Paksha and give the analogy of Nuvul Truchau, it is the niyama. यदा तु एष हेतुः अप्रतिपत्तिः उभयोः. In the second configuration, when there is an apratipatti, both of them keep mute, tada vipratishedhe paramityanena kim kriyate. This is my favorite word in this entire sutra. Dwaram. It opens a door. It says Parasutra should go ahead. Dwaram vipratishedhe param tavad bhavati. Forget about the next part. I'll come to that at some point in time, next class. So vipratishedhe param bhavati. So when both of them are keeping quiet, you have to open a door for one of them. That is the Vidhi Sutra interpretation in the Jati Paksha of Sutra application. When both of them are actively trying to enter to that door, you want to close that door for one of them, only allow other person to go through it. That's the Vyakti Paksha of Vipratishedhe Paramkari.
Niyama.
Niyama, sorry. Niyama. That's the Niyama for Vipratishedhe Paramkaryam for the Vyakti Paksha. Phenomenal.
It's just a perspective of, okay, when there is a competition, maybe two people are silent or two people are
It's going to go
really
beyond the
trying to
perspective.
overpower. So
It's going to go beyond the perspective. The fundamental question that I have not addressed is why have these two perspectives? Why he just doesn't say that, okay, sutras always behave in the Jati Paksha, or he can say sutras always behave in the Vyakti Paksha, and he doesn't need to do all these things. That's the real beauty of this sutra, which will come in the next class, because if I start today, it will be like probably too much overloaded, I think. First of all, you have to understand this concept of Vyakti Paksha versus Jati Paksha. Understand. So what happens is we need Vyakti Paksha at some point in time. There are real examples which I'm going to show. We need Jati Paksha at some other point in time. There are real examples that we'll show. And then we will see why he treats both of them, Vyakti Paksha and Jati Paksha, and how that business Niyama versus Dwara work in these cases.
So in those Vyakti Paksha cases also we are saying we will get Sadhu Rupam only, is it?
Because
Like
we are
that.
saying it is a Niyama. Siddhe sati arambha. Okay. Who should do? That's the niyama. We say only para should do. Vipratishedhe parameva karyam. So then in case of Supicha 73102 and Bahuvachane Jhaleta 73103, only Bahuvachane Jhaleta is going to act because that is param karyam. But if you treat it as a Jati Paksha, neither 73102 is going to act, neither 73103 is going to act. Dwaram kriyate. It opens the door and pushes 73103 out of it. Param karyam. 73103.
so is there any technique like now we say if we treat it as Jati Paksha or if we treat it as Vyakti Paksha, actually is there any concept like we have to treat it,
There's no
treat
concept
something
like
as a
that. No,
Vyakti
there's
or
no concept like that. And that is the reason he does not use Jati Paksha and Vyakti Paksha words in this sutram at all. Okay, in the Bhashyam. This Jati Paksha and Vyakti Paksha business is used by Nagesha in some of the later paribhashas. It's right over here. Okay, sorry, what you were asking. So
no
basically,
when
is there a final resolution? Should it be Jati Paksha or should it be Vyakti Paksha? There is no final resolution.
or at
In
least when it is a Dwara or Niyama, is there a Vidhi or Niyam when we compare to Supicha and Bahuvachane Jallet?
In
Do we
case of
say
Supicha and Bahuvachane Jhalyeta, whether there is a Vidhi or a Niyama doesn't really matter. In general, it is taken as a Niyama. Why? I will explain it in the next class. Okay.
and
Or
Mahodaya,
maybe,
all these discussions are applicable when two sutras compete, but both of them says the same karya. It doesn't matter which sutra we apply, or is there a Vipratisheda and then we prefer one over the other or anything like that?
so
That's the
basically,
question.
when two sutras compete, the karyas also compete. The point is, the karyas may not be on the same particle. So the one sutra can compete on the last swara, and second sutra can compete on the first swara, and still we call it competition. So actually, technically, it's not conflicting. First can conflict on, but it's in anga se adhikara. So eventually, it's acting on the same anga, whether it's the last entity or first entity. So in that case, we still call it as a competition. Okay, so it may not be precisely
So
physically
you are
same
saying the
character.
karya is the same, but the sthani are different, is what you are saying.
Karya may also be different. So, for example, in this case, one is doing akara, one is doing akara dirgha. One is
That is a clear thing, right, Mahodaya? Okay, when there
because
are
karya
two
is different.
karyas,
Karya is different.
yeah,
Yeah.
when
So
there are two karyas, we want to decide which karya to apply. I'm asking if I don't know if there will be a condition like that I have seen, but if both of them are giving the same karya, probably to the same sthani also, is there
we have
anything like that?
obviously have seen, right? Napumsakasya jhalachaha and ikochi vibhaktau.
Ah,
Both of them give
correct, correct,
namagama. Okay.
correct.
Use
Yeah.
param karyam. Ikochi vibhaktau.
Yeah, Mahoday. In Adanta Anga, I think
Yeah. 7172,
that
7173. Napumsakasya jhalacha ikochi
for the
vibhaktau.
jas and shas
Yeah.
probably sarvanama
So you see,
sthana.
exactly. You use vari plus jasa, you use ikochi
Ah.
vibhakta. So in this particular case, Napumsakasya Jhalacha versus ikochi vibhakta, if both of them are giving the same karya, and
Hmm.
then it really doesn't matter. So this is a matter of principle. Like even if you choose Napumsakasya Jhalacha, what really difference does it make?
Yeah, ultimately it's going to be the same. But I'm asking in Shastra, is there?
In Shastra, you use the ikochi vibhakta. Okay, because it is Shastra. That's it.
So
And we
Modi, the
still consider
sthani,
them as.
What?
Go ahead.
in the case of sthani difference also you're
This is
saying
exactly Jati Paksha. Go ahead. This is Jati Paksha. You understood what I'm saying, right? When two people were asking the same question simultaneously and one says go ahead, this is precise Jati Paksha, which is what I was trying to explain.
Okay.
Got it?
It took us a moment to understand what you were trying to say.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It should be clear, right? How a Jati Paksha behaves. Yeah. What you were asking? Yeah.
no, like you mentioned the same karyam is one thing, but you're saying even if it is applicable in the different sthani, is
It
that
still is.
still
Yeah. So, for example, a standard example of this is Taditeshvacha Madehe and Ata Upadhayaha. Ata Upadhayaha acts on the second last swara. Taditeshvacha Madehe acts on the very first particle, very first swara. So, in case of conflict between, now I will not go in the details. In case of conflict between Taditeshvacha Madehe and Ata Upadhayaha, we still use Vipratishdhe Param Karyam and Taditeshvacha Madehe wins over Ata Upadhayaha. Ata Upadhaya is acting on the right end of the word. Taditeshvacha Madehe is acting on the left end of the word. Ironically, both of them are doing vruddhi. Mata Upadhyaya does a vruddhi, Tadite Shachamade also does a vruddhi. But it doesn't matter. They're different particles. Like for example, if you take a word called bruhat, in bruhat plus aya, there will be Ata Upadhyaya which possibly acts on the of her. So her plus that Ata Upadhyaya will act. And Tadite Shoshamadehe will act on ru of bruhat. Both of them will give vruddhi. But the Adi Vruddhi wins over the Adyopadha Vruddhi. Again, example of Vipratishdhe Paramakaryam. We are going to see lots of examples in the upcoming class. The interesting point is the reason why he gives these two different aspects, Vipratishdhe Paramakaryam, it can be a niyama in one case and dwara or vidhi in other case, is not because there is a conflict at that particular step. The actual hidden reason is something beyond, and it's very interesting. The question is this: in case of Vipratishdhe Param Karyam, when one sutra applies by whatever mechanism, we select one sutra, let it be by calling it Vidhi and Dwaram, or let it be by calling Niyama in case of Vyakti Paksha, whatever. If we select one sutra, the question is, after selecting that one sutra, will the second sutra execute after that?
Mm. If the niyamas are still intact for that.
If the configuration is obviously still intact, if the configuration is still intact, and that is very easy, difficult to understand because of the sthanivat bhava business. Sthanivat bhava can make the adesha look like a sthani. So except in case of a ekal adesha, like the thing is clear in case of rukshebhyaha, it is a becoming a. Now a cannot become back to a because it's an ekal vidhi which is not allowed by sthanivat adesho nal vidhau. But in general, if it is not ekal adesha, then it is possible to ekal vidhi. Then it is possible to have the second sutra trying to act back after the first sutra. This is the place where that really Vyakti Paksha and Jati Paksha, or this is the place where the Niyama and Dwara will come. In the case of Jati Paksha, when we create a Dwara, when we create a door, and that's the reason why I love that word. What happens when the first sutra or the Para Sutra enters through that door?
The door
The
is
door
not
is
closed. The
still
second.
open. हाँ कि द्वारं विप्रतिषेधे परं तावद् भवति तस्मिन् कृते यदि पूर्वमपि प्राप्नोति तदपि भवति. Okay, when you create a dwara, first sutra can go and then the dwara is not closed, so the second sutra can follow. I mean, we are assuming that all the conditions are met. If the conditions are changed, there is nothing to do, right? So in case of apratipatti ubhayoho tulya balatvat, when it's a case of like a servant where nobody does any work and we say param avashyam bhavati, तदा विप्रतिषेधे परम इत्यनेन किं क्रियते? द्वारं विप्रतिषेधे परम तावद् भवति, परम तु अवश्यं भवति, तस्मिन् कृते यदि पूर्वमपि प्राप्नोति तदपि भवति. So you need cases or you have examples where there is a vipratishedha, you choose the parasutra and then you have to choose the purvasutra. The only way to derive these examples is to believe in the Jati Paksha, is to treat Vipratishedhe Param Karyam as a Vidhi Sutra, to consider this as a Dwara, to let the Parasutra pass through and then let the Purva Sutra pass through. On the other hand, there are examples where only one should execute. If the second executes, like for example, Vrukshebhya and so on, if the second executes, there will be a problem. You have to choose one. That is the place where you go to the Vyakti Paksha. You say, Vipratishedhe param karyam kim kriyate niyamaha vipratishedhe param eva bhavati. As soon as you use that eva word, the purva is out of question. Purva cannot happen. Vipratishedhe param eva bhavati. So there will be examples where you have to apply the parasutra, and after that, through sthanivat bhava or through some other places reasons, the purva sutra will have its possibility, but you are not allowed to apply the purva sutra because it is a niyama sutra. It says parameva bhavati. Okay, so our goal in the next class is to understand these various types of examples, because this is all theory. To understand these various type of examples where Vipratisheda Sutra acts as a Dwara and where Vipratisheda Sutra acts as a Niyama. In Paribhashendu Shekhara, in Paribhasha number 38, he talks about Purva Paranityantarangapavadanan, which is a global Paribhasha, and then right in the next Paribhasha he gives Punav Prasanga Vijnanat Siddham. This is the Jati Paksha where both sutras are going to apply one after the other. The next Paribhasha, Sukritgato Vipratishede Yad Badhitam Tad Badhitam Eva. This is the Vyakti Paksha where Yad Badhitam Tad Badhitam. Once blocked, always blocked. So you have examples where you need both of them. So to use the Viveka to conflicting Paribhashas. Somebody was asking in the last class, are there conflicting Paribhashas? One paribhasha says second should not apply, the second paribhasha says second should apply. Okay, look at the wording. Punaha prasanga vidnyana. Punaha prasanga. Again there is a prasanga. Once there is again prasanga, the purva can act. If there is no prasanga, obviously there is no question. But if there is again prasanga, the other can act. Siddham, acceptable. Whereas he says sakrudgato. Sakrudgati means simultaneous application. Sakrudgati, when there is a simultaneous application, and if a vipratisheda happens, yad badhitam tad badhitam. It will not apply again. Sakrudgato vipratishede yad badhitam tad badhitam. Okay, so essentially the whole situation, whole the background is this, that we have Vipratishedhe Param Karyam, which acts as a niyama and which acts as a vidhi. If Vipratishedhe Param Karyam starts acting as a vidhi, it creates a dwara. It creates a dwara because we want to apply the Purva Sutra after the Parasutra. If we don't want to apply Purva Sutra after the Parasutra, there is no reason to treat it as a vidhi. If we want to block the Parasutra, we apply it a niyama. Parameva bhavati. But if you want to apply it as a vidhi, we use the dwar or we use the jati paksha. So jati, and that's the whole discussion here. For example, in this So for example, Jati Paksha and Vyakti Paksha, this particular discussion is right here in the Sakrudito Vipratishedhe, because here he explains that in case of Vyakti Paksha, we have to apply Sakrudgato Vipratishedhe yat baditam tad baditam eva, because once one sutra is applied, you cannot apply the other one. In case of Jati Paksha, you have to apply Punah Prasanga Vijnanat Siddham. If one sutra is applied, other sutra can also apply after that. Clear? So our goal in the next class is to understand both these paribhashas, not what Nagesha is written. I am not teaching Shekhara here, but in general, basic understanding of these two paribhashas, and then get a bunch of examples. That will be one component, and then there is something called Purva Vipratishedha. Purva Vipratishedha is the reverse of Vipratishedha. He says, let's propose this sutram. Vipratishedhe param angadhikare purvam. In the angadhikara, it is purvam. In the normal case, it's param. So he says, let's propose this sutram. Vipratishedhe param angadhikare purvam. Vipratishedhe param ityuktva angadhikare purvam iti vaktavyam. Kim krutam bhavati purva vipratishedhaha na patitavyaha bhavanti. He says there are cases where a Purva Sutra, I'm sure you have studied this Vartikas with Purva Vipratishedha. So he says, let's make a sutra called Vipratishedhe Param Angadhikare Purvam, and then all your Purva Vipratishedhas can go away. We'll talk about this again in the next class. This is not a valid Vartika, but he comes up with a brilliant idea that if you turn the order of the sutra application in the Angadhikara, maybe you can get rid of a few Vartikas. We'll talk about all these things. Yeah. But none of this is Siddhanta. I'm sure you have never heard of this earlier because it is not a Siddhanta. It's just like one random point of discussion in case of Pratishita.
I still enjoy your param is shreshtam, that logic. It still
It's
appeals
there,
to
it's
me a
coming
lot.
from here, right? Param is Sreshtham, it comes
Yeah.
from here itself. Yeah.
Yeah. So in Jati Paksha, we can say that when there are two sutras which are ready to act at the same time, but both are waiting, they don't want to act on their own.
They don't want to show eagerness. They
So
don't
the
want to act
most
together.
eligible one we are taking and saying, now you go and act. Is that what?
We are saying Param. Most eligible
Param.
is Param is what we are telling. We are taking
Okay, the
Param, not
param is
most
the
eligible.
most eligible one, and so
Yeah.
we call that. Okay.
Correct. That is correct. That is correct. If Purva comes after that, we don't care. We are not saying you don't go. That argument is in the Vyakti Paksha. In Vyakti Paksha, you are holding collar of one of them and say, don't go. Because both of them are trying to go. So if you hold back one, the other will automatically go. So that is Viparameva Karyam. Whereas in Vijati Paksha, you are saying you go and then the door is open. If you want, you also go.
And we are also believing like Panini kind of set it up like that, so the param always works. Like
That is what we have to believe, because that is what Yathottaram Muninam Pramanyam. That is what Bhashyakara tells us to believe. So we believe. Anyway, deeper you go, there are further and further issues over there. So we'll stop here. If there are any questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, next week.